The Forgotten Spire. A lone figure named Alari walks through the mists of a forgotten kingdom, where spires of impossible architecture rise toward the sky, shifting and rearranging with every step. Alari is searching for something, though she doesn't remember what. All she carries is a golden key, smooth from years of holding it close. Act 1. The First Spire. Alari enters a vast courtyard. The walls seem to hum softly, and staircases spiral into nowhere. A single white bird watches from atop a broken column. She follows it, climbing a twisting path that loops back on itself. At the top, she finds a massive door with no handle, only a lock that fits her key. Alari hesitates. When she inserts the key, the spire shifts, lowering bridges and rotating towers, revealing new paths below. Narration: Alari's thoughts. The world remembers my steps, even if I do not. She presses forward, each turn revealing intricate puzzles where paths align only when viewed from certain angles. Act 2. The Hollow Garden. The path leads her to a floating garden suspended between spires. The white bird flutters ahead, resting beside a stone statue of a woman. As Alari approaches, the statue shifts, its eyes glow faintly. A voice echoes from the stone. "I have been waiting for you, Alari. You are the keeper of the Forgotten Spire." Memories stir, but remain distant. Alari must realign the broken pieces of the garden by rotating platforms and shifting staircases. As the garden blooms, the statue softens, revealing the figure to be a reflection of herself. Act 3. The Tower of Echoes. Alari ascends a tower that stretches endlessly upward. Each level mirrors a fragment of her past, moments she cannot fully grasp. Ghostly figures, echoes of her younger self, move along the platforms. She encounters a locked door with 3 missing keys. The bird leads her to the base of the tower, where 3 paths extend in different directions. Each path represents a memory. 1. The Path of Joy, a sunlit bridge where laughter echoes. 2. The Path of Loss, a dark chamber filled with crumbling tiles. 3. The Path of Hope, a narrow walkway high above the clouds. By traversing each path and solving the puzzles hidden within, Alari collects the keys. When she returns and unlocks the door, the tower trembles, and Alari feels a weight lifting. The echoes fade, and the spire begins to glow softly. Act 4. The Awakening Spire. Alari stands atop the highest point, staring out over the kingdom she had forgotten. The white bird lands beside her and transforms into a golden mask. As she places the mask over her face, memories flood back, of a kingdom swallowed by time, of a people who waited for their keeper to return. The final scene shows the spire rising higher, lifting Alari above the clouds. The world beneath begins to bloom, with new spires emerging from the fog. Narration: Alari's final thoughts. "I was never lost, the kingdom was simply waiting to be found." Sure, here's a more novel-like version of the story, rich in description and introspection. The Forgotten Spire. The mist had not always been there. Alari was certain of that. Yet now, it stretched endlessly across the landscape, veiling the ruins and spires that pierced the clouds like forgotten memories. She walked alone, barefoot on the smooth stone paths that wound between the towers. The sky above shifted with shades of pale blue and gold, though no sun could be seen. Her footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the stillness of the world. In her palm, she held a golden key. It was warm against her skin, as if it remembered something she had long forgotten. Alari did not know where she was going, only that the path led forward. She first saw the bird near the edge of a broken bridge. It was small and white, with feathers so light they seemed woven from the mist itself. It perched silently, watching her with bright, knowing eyes. When she took a step toward it, the bridge shifted. Stones rearranged themselves, spiraling upward into an impossible staircase that twisted through the empty air. The bird lifted its wings and flew higher, urging her to follow. Alari hesitated. The path ahead looked fragile, the steps narrow and sharp. Yet the key in her hand seemed heavier now, anchoring her. "The world remembers my steps, even if I do not." She ascended. At the top of the spire, a vast courtyard unfolded, silent, save for the soft hum of the wind. Columns stood half-formed, their tops curling into spirals like ancient shells. Pools of water reflected the sky, yet rippled as if disturbed by unseen footsteps. In the center of the courtyard stood a great stone door, seamless and smooth, except for a single keyhole. The bird landed beside it, cocking its head toward her. Alari approached, her heart tightening. She did not know what lay beyond, but something in her whispered that she had been here before. Her hand trembled as she placed the key into the lock. With a quiet click, the world shifted. Dash dash dash. The spire did not crumble, instead, it unfolded. Bridges descended from the sky, staircases unraveled from thin air, and the walls rearranged themselves like pieces of a forgotten puzzle. A path appeared beneath her feet, winding down into the heart of the tower. She walked forward, though she could not say if the spire was rising to meet her or she was falling deeper into it. Dash dash dash. The garden was waiting below. Suspended between the towers, the garden seemed untouched by time. Vines draped over stone arches, and strange flowers bloomed in spirals along the walls. In the center stood a statue of a woman, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. Alari paused. The statue's face was half hidden beneath a veil of ivy, but the shape of it felt familiar. She reached out, brushing the leaves away. Beneath the ivy was her own reflection. "I have been waiting for you," the statue whispered. Alari stepped back, but the voice followed, soft and warm, as if it had always belonged to her. "You are the keeper of the Forgotten Spire. This place has slept, but you have returned." Her fingers tightened around the key. The words stirred something deep within her, yet when she reached for the memory, it dissolved like mist. The garden began to shift again. Platforms rose and bridges turned, rearranging themselves into patterns she could not yet decipher. "The spire remembers," the voice said. "But it will not open until the pieces are made whole." Alari stepped forward, and the garden bloomed with her touch. Dash dash dash. The Tower of Echoes stood beyond the garden. It rose higher than any other, its top lost in the clouds. Alari climbed carefully, passing through chambers filled with strange mirrors and shadows. On the walls, faint reflections moved, shapes of a younger Alari, laughter echoing softly in the distance. She saw glimpses of herself running along sunlit bridges, sitting quietly beneath archways, and standing alone beneath the stars. They were fragments of something lost, but they slipped away the moment she reached for them. At the top of the tower stood a door with 3 locks. The bird landed on her shoulder, its feathers brushing against her cheek. 3 keys, it whispered. 3 paths unfolded before her. A bridge glowing with sunlight, warm and bright, filled with the sound of laughter. A dark path lined with crumbling stones, silent and heavy, the weight of loss hanging in the air. A narrow walkway above the clouds, fragile and thin, but filled with the soft hum of hope. Alari walked them all. She gathered the 3 keys, though each step felt heavier than the last. When she returned to the tower, the locks fell away, and the final door creaked open. Dash dash dash. At the highest point of the spire, Alari stood alone. The bird sat beside her, and for the first time, it spoke with her voice. "You were never lost," it said. "The kingdom was simply waiting to be found." As the mist cleared, Alari gazed out over the kingdom she had once forgotten. Towers rose from the clouds, their lights flickering to life as if greeting her return. The bird dissolved into light, leaving only a golden mask behind. Alari placed it over her face, and the memories returned in waves, soft, quiet, like an old song she had once known by heart. The spire shone brightly, lifting her above the clouds. And the world remembered her name. The Forgotten Spire. The mist had not always been there. Alari was certain of that. Yet now, it stretched endlessly across the landscape, veiling the ruins and spires that pierced the clouds like fragments of forgotten memories. She walked alone, barefoot on the smooth stone paths that wound between the towers. The sky above shifted with shades of pale blue and gold, though no sun could be seen. Her footsteps echoed softly, the sound swallowed by the stillness of the world. In her palm, she held a golden key. It was warm against her skin, as if it remembered something she had long forgotten. Alari did not know where she was going, only that the path led forward. Dash dash dash. The bird at the bridge. She first saw the bird near the edge of a broken bridge. It was small and white, with feathers so light they seemed woven from the mist itself. The bird perched silently, watching her with bright, knowing eyes. Alari stepped closer, expecting it to fly away. Instead, the bird held its ground, tilting its head to the side as if listening to the rhythm of her footsteps. A faint wind stirred. The bridge beneath the bird trembled and shifted. Stones rearranged themselves, spiraling upward into an impossible staircase that twisted through the empty air. The white bird lifted its wings and flew higher, urging her to follow. Alari hesitated. The path ahead looked fragile, the steps narrow and sharp, curling in ways that defied sense. Each stone hovered as if only half existing, waiting for her to make it real. Yet the key in her hand grew heavier now, anchoring her to the spot. The world remembers my steps, even if I do not. She whispered the words, though she did not know where they came from. She ascended. The staircase twisted under her weight, but never faltered. It carried her higher, and the mist thinned with each step. Dash dash dash. At the top, she found herself standing within a vast courtyard that stretched endlessly in all directions. Columns rose, spiraling like seashells toward the sky, their tops curling into strange patterns she could not name. Pools of water dotted the space, reflecting a sunless sky that shifted gently with every ripple. There was no sound here, save for the soft hum of the wind. In the center of the courtyard stood a door, immense and seamless, cut from a single slab of stone. No handle marked its surface, only a lock set perfectly at eye level. The bird landed beside the door, perching on a thin column that leaned precariously to the side. Alari approached. Her footsteps left faint impressions in the stone, as if she were the first to walk this path in a long time. She stopped in front of the door, her heart tightening. She did not know what lay beyond, but something in her whispered that she had been here before. Her hand trembled as she placed the key into the lock. With a quiet click, the world shifted. Dash dash dash. The shifting spire. The spire did not crumble. It unfolded. Bridges descended from the sky like ribbons unraveling, staircases uncoiled from thin air, and the walls rearranged themselves, peeling apart and curling back into place like petals of stone. A path appeared beneath her feet, winding down into the heart of the tower. She walked forward, though she could not say if the spire was rising to meet her or if she was falling deeper into it. The bird followed. Dash dash dash. The garden was waiting below. Suspended between the towers, the garden seemed untouched by time. Vines draped over stone archways, and strange flowers bloomed in spirals along the walls. In the stillness, faint motes of light drifted like fireflies, settling along the edge of a circular pool at the garden's center. A statue stood there, half covered in ivy. It depicted a woman with her hands pressed together, as if in prayer. The figure's face was veiled by leaves and petals, and though worn by age, the statue's posture held a quiet dignity. Alari paused, the hairs on her arms rising. The statue's face was hidden, yet the shape of it felt familiar. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers over the leaves. The ivy fell away easily beneath her touch, curling to the ground like silk. Beneath it was her own reflection. "I have been waiting for you," the statue whispered. Alari stumbled back. The voice was soft and warm, as if it had always belonged to her. "You are the keeper of the Forgotten Spire. This place has slept, but you have returned." Her fingers tightened around the key. The words stirred something deep within her, yet when she reached for the memory, it dissolved like mist. The garden began to shift again. Platforms rose, staircases rotated, and the arches spiraled, rearranging themselves into patterns she could not yet decipher. "The spire remembers," the voice said. "But it will not open until the pieces are made whole." Alari stepped forward, and the garden bloomed beneath her touch. Dash dash dash. The Tower of Echoes. The path led her beyond the garden, to the base of the tallest tower. It rose higher than any other spire, its peak hidden within the clouds. As she ascended, the walls whispered faintly, memories trailing along the edges of the stone. In the dim light, faint reflections flickered. She saw glimpses of herself running along sunlit bridges, standing beneath flowering archways, and gazing at the stars. Yet none of these memories stayed when she reached for them. At the top of the tower, she found a door bound by 3 locks. The bird landed quietly beside her. 3 keys, it whispered. 3 paths unfurled before her. One path glowed with warm sunlight. Laughter echoed faintly in the distance. The second path lay in shadow, the stones cracked and broken. The third rose high above the clouds, thin and narrow, yet filled with soft light. Alari walked them all. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she gathered the keys one by one. When she returned to the tower, the locks fell away. The final door opened. Dash dash dash. At the spire's peak, the mist had cleared. The bird sat beside her, and when it spoke again, it was with her voice. "You were never lost. The kingdom was waiting to be found." As she gazed over the towers, golden lights bloomed across the land. Alari stood at the spire's peak, the key cool in her palm. The mist below shifted, revealing faint outlines of bridges and towers stretching far beyond the horizon. Some of the spires leaned precariously, while others stood straight, proud and untouched by time. Golden lights flickered to life across the distant structures, as if the world itself were awakening. But the sky above remained empty. The white bird perched silently beside her, its feathers catching the soft light. It no longer urged her forward. Instead, it watched, patient and still. Alari turned the key over in her hands, tracing the worn grooves along its surface. There was a door ahead. Smaller than the ones before, it was set into the farthest wall of the spire's peak. The stone around it was cracked, thin strands of ivy curling up along the edges. Unlike the others, there was no lock visible, only the faint outline of the keyhole. Alari approached, pressing her palm against the door. It was cold, and beneath her touch, the stone trembled. Beyond this door, the bird said softly, lies the final memory. The final memory. Her heart quickened. She placed the key into the lock, but this time, it did not turn. The door remained sealed, as if waiting for something more. Alari stepped back, scanning the tower for another path, but the spire was still. No shifting staircases, no unraveling bridges. Only silence. The bird tilted its head. Not all doors open with keys. Alari's hand fell to her side. For the first time since she began her ascent, doubt crept in. She had walked every path laid before her, gathered the pieces of herself scattered across the spires, yet the weight of something unfinished lingered. The bird's gaze drifted beyond the edge of the spire. Alari followed its eyes and saw it, the faint glimmer of a bridge extending outward, vanishing into the mist. A bridge that had not been there before. Alari stepped forward. The bridge felt fragile beneath her feet, as though it were made of glass. Each step sent ripples along the surface, distorting the reflection of the sky below. The further she walked, the thinner the mist became, until she reached the far side. A second tower stood there, silent and untouched. It was smaller than the others, smooth and seamless like polished marble. No spirals or archways adorned it, only a narrow entrance at its base. A faint light glowed from within, flickering like a distant star. Alari stepped inside. The interior of the tower was narrow and winding. Unlike the grand halls of the spires she had passed through, this space felt intimate, almost familiar. The walls were etched with faint markings, symbols she did not recognize yet felt she had seen before. Her footsteps echoed softly. As she climbed, the light ahead grew brighter, illuminating faint carvings along the staircase. They depicted scenes, of bridges and gardens, of towers reaching into the clouds. At the top of the staircase, Alari entered a circular room. The light here was soft, diffused from a single source in the center of the chamber. Floating gently above the ground was a second key. But this key was different. It was silver, smooth and unmarked. It shimmered faintly, as if caught between existence and memory. Alari reached out, her fingertips brushing against it. The moment her skin touched the key, the tower shifted. The walls rippled, the carvings unraveling like threads. Images flickered, brief flashes of moments she could not place. A pair of hands holding hers beneath the stars. The sound of a soft voice whispering her name. The feeling of standing beneath an archway, watching the sun rise over the spires. Then, as quickly as they appeared, the memories faded. Alari stood alone in the empty chamber, the silver key now resting in her palm. When she descended the tower, the bridge she had crossed was gone. The spire awaited her. She returned to the sealed door. This time, when she pressed the silver key into the lock, it turned easily. With a soft click, the door opened inward, revealing a long, narrow hall bathed in golden light. The bird fluttered ahead, its feathers glowing faintly as it disappeared into the distance. Alari followed. The hall led to a wide balcony overlooking the entire kingdom. From this height, she could see everything, the spires stretching far into the distance, the bridges connecting them like threads of silk. The mist had begun to lift, revealing more of the world than she had ever known. At the edge of the balcony, a figure stood with their back to her. They wore a long, flowing cloak, their hands resting lightly on the stone railing. Alari froze. There was something familiar about the shape of their shoulders, the curve of their head. She stepped closer, the sound of her footsteps drawing the figure's attention. Slowly, they turned. Alari's breath caught in her throat. The figure was herself, but not as she was now. The reflection standing before her looked older, more weathered, yet peaceful in a way Alari had never felt. The other Alari smiled softly, as if she had been waiting for this moment. I wondered when you would find me. Alari's grip tightened around the silver key. What is this place? She asked. Her reflection gestured toward the spires below. It is the kingdom you left behind. A place built from memory and time. And now, it is yours to reclaim. Alari stepped to the edge of the balcony, gazing down at the kingdom stretching far beyond the mist. Why did I leave? The reflection's expression softened. Because you forgot who you were. The words lingered, quiet and heavy. Alari watched the spires below, their golden lights flickering gently. The mist had lifted, but there was still more to uncover. Her reflection extended a hand. Alari hesitated. The outstretched hand trembled slightly, as if the reflection feared she might refuse. 1,000 questions crowded her mind. Why had she forgotten? How long had this kingdom waited? And what lay beyond the horizon where the mist still clung stubbornly to the edges of the world? But none of those questions found her voice. Instead, Alari stepped forward and clasped the hand of her reflection. Their fingers fit together perfectly, as if they had never been apart. The reflection smiled, a soft, knowing smile that felt like a sunrise breaking over the spires. Come, the reflection said. There is more to remember. Dash dash dash. They walked together along the edge of the balcony, following a narrow path that curved along the side of the tower. The golden light dimmed as the sky deepened into shades of lavender and soft indigo. Below, the kingdom stretched endlessly, the spires rising like ancient sentinels. Bridges shimmered faintly, their outlines barely visible as if they existed halfway between dream and stone. Was it always like this? Alari asked quietly. Her reflection paused. No, she replied, her voice distant. Once, the kingdom was whole. The spires shone brightly, and the bridges were strong. But time erodes even the brightest places. And when the memories fade, she trailed off, glancing at Alari. The mist comes. Alari looked out over the distant towers. The mist lingered stubbornly along the farthest edges, swirling softly around the base of the most distant spires. I don't remember leaving, Alari said, more to herself than to the reflection. Her reflection's grip tightened. You didn't leave, not in the way you think. Alari frowned. Then how did I forget? They reached a second balcony, smaller and more enclosed. A single stone bench sat at the far end, overlooking a lower section of the kingdom. The reflection gestured for Alari to sit, and she did so, her hands resting lightly against the smooth stone. Her reflection remained standing, gazing out over the mist. Memories don't vanish all at once, the reflection said. They drift, piece by piece, until the shape of them becomes unrecognizable. Until one day, you look at your own reflection and no longer remember the person staring back. Alari swallowed. But I remember now. The reflection finally turned to face her, golden light catching the edges of her features. Only parts of it. There is still more you have forgotten. Alari opened her mouth to respond, but the reflection raised a hand, silencing her. You are not ready for all of it, she said gently. Not yet, but there is something you must remember now, before we can continue. The reflection stepped closer, and as she did, the air around them shifted. The mist thickened, curling around the edges of the balcony like waves against the shore. The spires below faded, their outlines growing faint. Close your eyes. Alari hesitated, but the reflection's voice held a quiet authority she could not resist. She closed her eyes. The stone beneath her felt cold, but the air was warm, as if sunlight streamed down from a hidden sky. A faint breeze stirred her hair. And then, she heard footsteps. Dash dash dash. Soft, distant footsteps echoing along a long, narrow hallway. Alari opened her eyes, but she was no longer on the balcony. She stood alone in a corridor lit by faint lanterns along the walls. The floor was polished marble, reflecting her image with each step she took. There were no doors, only the endless stretch of the corridor ahead. Where am I? She whispered, but her voice did not echo. The footsteps continued, not her own. Someone else was walking ahead of her, just out of sight. Alari quickened her pace. The corridor wound in gentle curves, and though she could not see the source of the footsteps, they never faded. Always just ahead. Wait, she called, her voice louder now. The footsteps paused. And then, slowly, they turned back toward her. From around the bend, a figure emerged, cloaked in shadow but unmistakably familiar. It was the reflection, but something was different. This version of her wore no peaceful smile. Her expression was strained, her eyes darker. She carried something in her hands, an object wrapped in cloth, heavy and carefully cradled. Alari slowed, her eyes drawn to the bundle. What is that? She asked. The reflection hesitated, looking down at the object she carried. It's yours, she said softly. Alari took another step closer, but the reflection shifted, almost protectively. I don't understand. The reflection exhaled, as if the weight of the object were growing heavier by the second. Not all memories return as they were, the reflection said. Some fracture. She slowly unwrapped the cloth, revealing a fragment of stone. It was small, no larger than Alari's palm, but its surface shimmered faintly. Carved into the stone was a symbol, a spiral, similar to the patterns she had seen on the walls of the spires. I found this at the base of the towers long ago, the reflection explained. Before the mist came, it is a piece of the kingdom that broke away. Alari reached out to take it, but the reflection pulled back slightly. It will be heavy, she warned. Alari frowned. It's just a stone. The reflection met her eyes. No, Alari, it is not. Reluctantly, the reflection placed the fragment into Alari's hands. The moment her fingers curled around the stone, the corridor shuddered. The walls trembled and cracked, pieces of marble peeling away as the mist flooded in. Alari stumbled, clutching the fragment tightly. What's happening? Her reflection stepped back, her form fading into the mist. You must carry it now, she said, her voice distant. The rest of the kingdom waits for you to remember. And with that, she was gone. The corridor dissolved around her, leaving only mist and silence. Alari clutched the fragment, its weight growing heavier with each passing moment. The spiral carved into the stone glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She stood alone at the edge of the mist, the kingdom beyond barely visible. The spires flickered in and out of view, as if waiting for her to decide whether they would remain standing or crumble into the void. The reflection's final words lingered in her mind. The rest of the kingdom waits for you to remember. Alari looked down at the fragment in her hand. The spiral carved into it seemed to shift slightly, as if responding to her gaze. A memory stirred, a tower, taller than any other, standing at the center of the kingdom. Its base had once been whole, but cracks had formed over time. The spiral symbol had been carved into the foundation to bind the spires together, but when the mist arrived, the stone had fractured, and with it, the memory of the kingdom had begun to fade. She remembered now. The kingdom had not been lost to time. She had sealed it away. The mist began to part. The bridges reformed beneath her feet, stretching outward toward the distant spires. Slowly, carefully, Alari stepped forward, the fragment clutched tightly in her hand. As she crossed the bridge, the spires around her shifted, spiraling upward like blooming flowers. Their surfaces shimmered with faint golden light, the carvings along their walls reappearing as if drawn by an unseen hand. With each step, the kingdom returned. Pools of water reflected the rising spires. Gardens unfurled along the edges of the towers, and archways spiraled gracefully overhead. The mist faded further, revealing paths that twisted and coiled like ribbons, connecting the spires once more. At the center of it all stood the tallest tower, the heart of the kingdom. Alari approached, the bridge leading her directly to its base. The door at the tower's entrance was unmarked, save for a single keyhole shaped like the spiral on the fragment she carried. Without hesitation, she pressed the stone into the keyhole. The ground trembled softly beneath her feet, and the door swung open without a sound. Inside, the chamber was vast and empty, save for a single pedestal at its center. Upon it rested a crown, woven from silver and gold, its surface marked by the same spiraling patterns that adorned the towers. Alari stepped forward, her reflection appearing beside her once more. But this time, the reflection did not speak. It only smiled, and when Alari reached for the crown, the reflection dissolved into light, merging with her. As her fingers brushed the crown, the final memory returned. She had been the ruler of this kingdom, its keeper in its heart. But when the fractures appeared, doubt had crept in. She feared losing what she had built, and so, she sealed the kingdom away within the mist, locking even her own memories behind spiraling doors. Now, as the crown rested in her hands once more, the weight of the kingdom returned to her. But it was no longer a burden. She placed the crown upon her head. The spires rose higher, the golden lights glowing brighter as the mist fully retreated beyond the edges of the world. The kingdom was whole again. And Alari stood at its heart, not as a forgotten reflection, but as the one who remembered. From the highest tower, she gazed out over the land, watching as the bridges connected and the gardens bloomed once more. The white bird returned, landing quietly on the railing beside her. Alari smiled softly, lifting her hand to let the bird perch upon her fingers. The kingdom was never truly lost, she whispered. The bird's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she knew. The mist would not return.